Learning ancient Greek is like being lost in a storm on the high seas, tossed by the winds of dialects, battered by waves of suppletive verbs, without hope of ever navigating your way. Then, through the murky haze of diacritics, you see a light, a beacon summoning you to sandy shores and safe harbors, a tower shining through the darkness. This is the Pharos, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, guiding you through the rocky promontories of word choice, with Koine and Attic prose vocabulary laid out in thematic sections, including time expressions, clothing, animals, and emotions. Marked by frequency, every single entry cited to its authors in authentic ancient Greek texts. Today, let's climb that tower in the harbor and have a conversation with the lighthouse keeper that lit this fire. I have the honor of speaking with the author of this magnificent tome, Adrian Hundhausen. Thank you so much for being with us today. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm doing great, and I'm doing even better now that I see how seriously you're taking my book with all those tabs in it. So what are you marking in the book with all those tabs?
Well, I am marking. So there are the 38 chapters: the human body and life and health and mind, soul, and thought, emotions, morals, military matters. And so I put tabs on each one of them just to make it as I get used to the book. And
Great.
yeah, I have.
I like your attitude.
I appreciate it. They're helpful and they help me just to get just to see how much is here is mind-blowing. I mean, how long did it take you to do this, Adrian?
Listen, I expected it to take 2 years, and it ended up being about 5.5. And I think the scope of the project expanded as I went along, and the number of the sources that I used for my corpus grew as well.
It's incredible because, as far as I can tell, I still feel like quite a novice with ancient Greek, but it's the first time that we have all of ancient Greek summarized to frequency and theme, as far as vocabulary, expressions, and idiom. And that's never really been done before, right?
As far as I know, this is the first one which is really corpus based. And so we've had what I would call thematic lexica before,
Hmm.
but they've never been done. There's never been one that's been done thoroughly with corpus linguistics applied to it.
What did you use primarily for figuring out frequency?
So, I mean, you're aware of this magnificent website called we always call it the Thesauros, but I guess it's probably got an official name in Latin. Is it
It's the same
Thesaurus
word,
Linguae Graecae?
Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, TLG.
Right. And so
I just
this
say
is
TLG.
run out of the University of California, I
Mhm.
think, and it's magnificent. It's got all of the Greek texts, literature that has survived from Homer up to the 17th century. They're still adding a lot of medieval texts and early modern texts,
Mm.
but it's basically all there if it's more or less a literary text. So papyri are not in there, but everything that we have that was meant to be a book or something like that is in this corpus. So that was available to me. And and as you know, I decided to basically make this a lexicon for Koine and Attic also to a certain extent, which really overlap
Mm.
to a great degree. So then I had to decide which of the sources available on this in this TLG to use.
Right. Yeah. Well, in fact, I want to emphasize right now, though this is my vehement opinion that anybody with the slightest interest in the ancient Greek language, even as a beginner and certainly intermediate and advanced, but even as a beginner, just get this book. And no one is paying me to say that. I just really believe, having seen this and having gone through it, just starting to see how useful and important this is, that this is just vital. This is something that we have not had. And when it comes to every goal that we have as students of ancient Greek, which is to appreciate the literature better for those of us who want to speak ancient Greek, and therefore, of course, to be able to read better, to be able to have a real sense of what this language is like, I finally feel like, finally the answer, because dealing with so many other tools like LSJ and other dictionaries that are available to us, they don't tell you frequency. They give you Homer. I mean, I love Homer, and
Yeah.
people know that. I love all the Homeric things and the epic, but it's extremely difficult just to figure out a verb conjugation
Yeah.
of something. And then yet you show, especially if there's an irregular conjugation, how it's done in Koine, and also how it's done in Attic. You had very good reasons for mining a lot from the Koine corpus. But the fact that really interesting thing about the book, and I guess that you discovered, is at least 75% of these really important vocabulary words in Koine are also Attic. Therefore, I definitely recommend the Pharos to all students of Ancient Greek. But if you want to learn the language and you don't know where to start, then look no further than this video sponsor, the Ancient Language Institute.
Τι ο διδάσκαλος? Τι γράφει?
Much like my guest Adrian, all the instructors at ALI know the vital importance of communicating in the language in order to truly acquire it. Speaking with your teachers and fellow students in Ancient Greek rapidly improves your ability to read, and that is the goal of using Ancient Greek actively. This immersion method that ALI uses is accomplished in the friendly atmosphere of experienced instructors and enthusiastic fellow students. The deadline to register for the fall term is August 10th, which is the perfect time to begin your voyage into the vast ocean of Ancient Greek literature. The fall term is also the only time of the year you can start out with the Biblical Hebrew course as a beginner, so if that interests you, make sure you don't miss the August 10th deadline. You can also sign up for beginner Latin and even beginner Old English, which has become one of my very favorite new languages thanks to the outstanding courses and materials and instructors at ALI. Year-round, there's also lots of intermediate and advanced courses available, and even private tutoring one-on-one. Go to ancientlanguage.com and come be a part of this amazing renaissance that we're living in by gaining access to ancient literature in a fun and exciting way that'll open you up to worlds you'd only dreamed of. So this is the Ancient Greek, this is the
Yeah.
Ancient Greek reference book.
I mean, Ancient Greek is different, as you know. Then it's different from Latin in the sense that we've got works written in many different dialects. So you've got your Homeric works, you've got Attic tragedy, which is written in its own language. We have works in Ionic, so that's Herodotus and Hippocrates and a few others. But this kind of Koine and Attic, this is really the center of Graikitas, as you probably would call it, being a Latinist. This doesn't really help you if you, well, there's Gorky. I want everybody. Gorky, can you say hello to the world?
Hey,
Usually,
Gorky.
Gorky, ho Aegyptios. Gorky, say hello to everybody. There we go.
Aw.
When Gorky, Gorky all he has to do is hear a couple of words of Latin or Greek, and he jumps up and he wants to be in on the conversation. So
That is a classy cat, a classical cat.
We'll have to put up with him, but yeah. So this doesn't have the poetic words that are kind of really, I want to say, limited to appearing in Attic tragedy, and it doesn't really help you if you want to read epic poetry, whether that be Homer or a later imitator. But this is really the vocabulary of the center of ancient Greek. So
yeah.
So I think it should be useful for just about everybody.
Well, it helps to solve the problem that I have felt from the beginning, because every single teaching tool I've seen for teaching ancient Greek, from grammar translation textbooks to even popular things like Athanase or Thrasymachus or these readers that I like a lot, they are also hypothetically based on an Attic or Koine, but they're also so interested in giving, here's some stuff from Homer, or here's some, I'm trying to think of some other Hesiod, or something that's different, and it's really difficult for a beginner to feel their way through the language. And I think what it does to the learners, it just starts to create these obstacles in your brains, like, oh, is this epic, or is this something, and you start,
Yeah.
and just that it creates some kind of effective filter, I think, in the
Right.
learning.
And listen, the way I designed this lexicon is, it's based on my experience in learning modern languages. And just, to try to make an analogy, if you want to learn German, you start by learning sort of standard modern German that appears every day, that Germans speak every day. And, you'll find in the newspapers and on TV and on YouTube or whatever. And you're not going to worry when you're starting out about the kind of words that appear in the Nibelungenlied is that from the 13th century?
Yeah.
And that just makes obvious sense. And it's the same thing. And, if you want to learn Spanish, you start with, the modern everyday Spanish, which is spoken. And then later on, once you get good at that, you might add some of you might go and read Lope de Vega or something like that, or, the story of El Cid, if you want to go back to medieval Spanish. But certainly in the beginning, in the first few years, you don't want to mix them.
Mm.
And so, I designed this to be a lexicon of what is essentially standard ancient Greek, which basically means Koine, in which I think 75% of surviving ancient Greek is written, plus to a certain extent the Attic prose,
Yeah.
right? Not the Attic tragedy, but the Attic prose. So again, this lexicon really represents what we should consider sort of a standard ancient Greek.
Yeah, absolutely. And but what's interesting too is how really unified they are, the Attic and Koine. Certainly there are differences, and you note those, but people have ideas that Attic and Koine, they're certainly different, but that they're somehow incredibly different.
And they're
And
not radically different. And so,
no. Yeah, they're quite unified, and we see all kinds of authors, not just Atticizing ones like Lucian, but just, Plutarch and others that are more literary Koine. It's very similar to or indistinguishable from Attic much of the
I
time.
mean, there are differences. So there are some, just to give you an example, the typical Attic way of saying that I'm not capable of doing something would be "ukhoiostemi
Right.
polýMATHY," and that survives in Koine at middle and higher registers. So that's in the book. Whereas the famous, I guess it's in all the Platonic dialogues, the ein de go, which means I said, or
Mm.
a the host, which is he said, that didn't survive into even literary Koine. So that's not in there. So I'm not going to say that everything that you'll find in Attic prose is included in the book, but most of it is.
Yeah, I love the introduction, and I highly recommend everybody who gets the book, which is hopefully everybody listening, to read the introduction, because you note the sources, which are really important. Koine sources, 22 of them. Why did you choose these sources?
I actually started out with probably 5 or 6, but then I started reading more, and I thought maybe I should include those. And then as I myself kind of became more and more familiar with what was written in Koine over the kind of 5.5 years that I was working on this project, I just ended up with these 22. And so it's a really good representative sample of what was written in Koine. So you've got your biblical and Hebrew writings, so New Testament, Old Testament, Josephus, I think we say in English,
Hmm.
and Philo of Alexandria. But then pagan historians and philosophers, geographers are in there. So Plutarch, Strabo, Marcos Aurelius.
Mm.
So a good supply of pagans. There's some popular narrative. So, I mean, and nobody pays much attention really, as far as I can see, to the 5 ancient novels that have survived. We have
Right.
5 ancient adventure novels, a couple of which are just outstanding, and my favorite is in this list of 22. It's written by a person apparently named Chariton, and it survives in a single manuscript, and it's just a fantastic adventure novel from apparently the late first century AD,
Mm.
and it's probably my favorite. If I had to pick a favorite book in ancient Greek, this is probably it. And if I had to, have you read it?
No, now
You
I will.
will. You
I
will,
heard.
and you must.
Okay.
And if anything, it reminds me. It reminds me so much of almost Alexandre Dumas, right? It's
Yeah.
just
Okay.
that kind of, and I guess, there are people who are, those who are into French literature. There are probably many who wouldn't consider Alexandre Dumas to be among the best French authors, but I would, I love it. And these ancient Greek novels, at least the ones that I like the most, are sort of in that spirit. So there are three of these more popular kind of novels included,
Mm.
to give an idea of
Yeah.
the kind of language which was in that kind of literature. And then there's a lot of technical literature as well. There's a botanist, there's Galen for medicine, Ptolemy for astronomy and geography. There's who else? Oh, Hero of Alexandria, who was an amazing engineer. So he's in this corpus as well. And then in the end, there's a few didactic works, Aesop's Fables, the fantastic compendium of jokes that we have from the
Right.
third and fourth centuries. That's the first collection of jokes that we have in human history. And so those are in there as well. So I tried to make sure that kind of all genres of writing were represented.
That's really tremendous because so much of the focus on literature goes either to a few Attic authors, or it goes to just some New Testament if people want to learn Koine, but there's so much more out there. I know that it's just this almost endless ocean to swim through, and I've barely gotten started.
Yeah,
And
and I
yeah,
think I tried to make this extremely helpful, and I think this is probably the first time that this has ever been done in a lexicon in any language, is that
yeah,
with every head word here, I went, I would never do this again, and I didn't realize how much work this entailed when I started the project. But for every head word, I went and checked which of those 22 sources or authors used it. And that information is at the end of every single entry so that you can see immediately what kind of author used this word. So that's, I think, unique. You have some experience with people who are trying to revive ancient Greek and speak it at all. And that the problem is always you hear a new word and the question is, yeah, but do I need to know that one? Is that one going to be in the works that I'm going to? Well, now
right. Or
you're
debates
in
of
this
whether,
context.
oh, that's just a Koine word. Like in fact, I've learned things from this where someone has told me, "Oh, that's a Koine term or expression or something. It's not Attic. You shouldn't use it." You have an asterisk next to
Yeah.
terms
So I mean,
that are there, and then I find that, oh no, it actually is Attic,
yeah,
and the
yeah.
person just didn't know. I don't
So
blame them because
the
there's so much
Attic,
to know, but
yeah, I mean, the Attic prose is not really my area of expertise, but in the group of ancient Greek speakers that I'm a member of, where we all speak, we do have one who is really more interested in that Attic prose, and just to humor him, I guess. I did him the favor for every entry. I also did a quick check to see if it appeared in one of the six kind of most famous writers of Attic prose, and if it does, it's indicated it. So you don't know which of those six, but that little asterisk means that yeah, it's in classic Attic prose as
yeah,
well as in
exactly.
Koine.
Like Plato or Lysias or
And so
Demosthenes.
you're saying, I haven't actually
Yeah.
done a check, but you're saying it's, and I think you're probably right. It's about 75% of the entries in this lexicon.
I mean,
So
almost
there's,
any page, it's very difficult to find one without an asterisk. Here, I just looked at one. Whole arotes is the plowman or husbandman. So PGA, so that's Plutarch, Galen, and A is
if it's a small A, it'll
Aesop's
be about a,
Fables, big
yeah.
A,
So, yep.
and Lucian. Now, Lucian is also highly revered as a good Atticist.
Yeah. So he
And
used it. Yeah.
so it's like, oh, well, because if it's in Lucian, most people who want to speak in Attic, if they can't find it in actual 5th century or 4th century BC, they'll go to
Yeah.
Lucian because he knew what he was doing. At least that was closer to that time period than us, so we tend to trust him a lot. But everything else, I'm just looking at here, oh, and here's one. Oh, it's an Aeschylus. Oh, well, God forbid we use something from
Right.
Aeschylus,
Right. And
that
so that's for, again, and that kind of is for, so it appears in Koine, but also in Attic Tragedy. And so you have your choice. If you think that if you're going to be reading Attic Tragedy, okay, maybe that's one that you'll want to learn or you want to know. If you're reading Koine, obviously if it's in this lexicon, it's there in Koine. If you're really going to be strict and you only want to be reading Plato and Xenophon or whatever, well, okay, then this one maybe is not one you need to worry about.
yeah, maybe, yeah, perhaps. But yeah, it's yeah, and
But that's
then
kind of, I think,
mhm.
listen, and I'm not going to lie and say that there aren't places that you can get this corpus information, but you have to subscribe to the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, which is reasonably expensive, and you would have to do a search, a corpus search for every word, and there's no time for that.
You
So
did the work because you did the groundwork for all
yeah,
of
I did
us.
that for everybody, so nobody has to ever do that again, basically.
I think this is a bargain. What's so great too is I don't know how many pages this has because it doesn't have page numbers. All I know that it's enormous and it's heavier than my Smith, my Smythe grammar, and I like it
It's
a lot more too. How many
apparently
pages?
it's yeah, Jenny, who put it all together, my fantastic editor and proofreader, she said it's 671 pages of main section plus the index.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, like, to be honest with you, I had no idea that it was this big until I had the 38 individual categories all finished,
Mhm.
by themselves, and I had never put them all together, and I sent them to Jenny, who created the final PDF to send to Amazon, and she said, Adrian, it's 671 pages.
Boy, I think it's an absolute bargain for the incredible amount of information that you give to all of us out there who have some interest in the ancient Greek language. You're very witty even in what the most mundane, kind of banal things throughout the book where you might mention that something about this or that, and it's hilarious. I'm trying to remember some of the entries that made me laugh.
And here's a good example of that. How do we actually date the year? Well, there is the Seleucid year. That is one way to do it. And that is from when the Seleucid Empire begins in about 311 BC. This would be too simple, however. For the Macedonians and the royal court of Antioch, the year began in the autumn, whereas for the Babylonian and Judean reckoning, it began in the spring. It seems that Josephus reckons according to the Antioch variant, whereas the author of 1 Maccabees mixes dates from both because he was using sources from different parts of the empire. Enjoy your ancient Greek.
I don't believe you. Look, what's my last name?
Hundhausen.
So obviously there's nothing funny in this book. I don't know what you're talking about.
I disagree. And yeah, I just wanted to read this part in the introduction. And what about that sweet little asterisk after the sequence of letters? But then there's an asterisk just to avoid disappointment should this book fall into the hands of any modern Kitos, the nickname for the grammarian who, at the banquet of Athenaeus's Hypnosophistae, obsessively asked, Kitai ou kitai, that is this found in a good Attic author or not? I've added the asterisk when a word occurs in the same meaning in the authentic writings of any of the 6 most fetid and fetishized writers of the holy or Attic prose, Plato, Thucydides, Xenophon, Demosthenes, Isocrates, and Lysias. And of course, the overlap is rather extensive, as you say. And naturally, what's also that I found very interesting too is that whatever the Koine authors tend to do, if they use people just think, oh, Koine uses double sigma, but I'd seen this too, looking at Plutarch and things like that. Well, sometimes you see double tau, and I was
Yeah.
shocked how many, almost more than half that I've just come across so far are double taus instead of double sigmas, and that's the Koine norm
Yeah, and
for a
they
lot of them.
and they used both. So for some verbs, the convention would be to have the double tau, and then for other verbs, the convention would be to have the double sigma. And they mixed and according to which word it was. So it was
Yeah.
listen, Koine Greek was, I mean, a bit, I mean, it had the same function as English has now. And it really vacuumed in a lot of ideas and words from everywhere, and didn't they really didn't have any obsession with purity or whatever.
Right.
And that's, one of the reasons why Koine can be pretty expressive, is that it, has a lot of vocabulary at its, a Koine, an author writing Koine had a lot of um, words at his or her disposal. So
Yeah.
it's,
And it reminds me too, like in modern English, we have fox and vixen, which in pure Old English dialects. In one, it was fox and fixen, using a modern pronunciation. The other was vox and vixen, and Anglian and Old Saxon got mixed together, and we have a result of this
yeah,
combination.
one has the F and the other has the V. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So those things happen a lot in language, and the the sort of naturalness of that is really interesting. So yeah, I don't know, I find that really that
Yeah,
particular
and
one.
again, I've gone to the trouble, so nobody else has to do it. So what I did is, for each of these verbs, I checked the corpus for these, these 22 sources at least, and looked at whether this verb was more written with the double sigma or the double tau. And usually it's pretty clear. It's hardly ever 50-50.
Yeah,
Usually it's either overwhelmingly that writers at all registers prefer the double sigma, or they overwhelmingly prefer the double tau. And
that's
so
so
that,
helpful.
again, that tells you that it depended on the verb, and everybody, I guess, was familiar with these conventions.
That's so helpful because one would otherwise be inclined to just use the double tau
Right.
or just use the double sigma, and they would, by doing so, by trying to be more Koine, perhaps one using double sigma everywhere would end up erring by doing something that was
Yeah.
more ionic than Koine. That's so interesting. You say in the introduction, personally, I can sometimes learn a word more effectively when I know its etymology or a modern word derived from it. So I've given this information in brackets where it is known, and I think it might be helpful. Mostly this is from Bailey, Montanari, and Romizzi, and occasionally Beekes, where the French and Italians cannot get along. And Indo-European roots are not normally given since these are not useful to normal people.
They're not useful to normal people like us.
Right, exactly. But if anyone does want to know PIE etymologies, one can just go to Wiktionary and figure
Right.
that out.
And listen, I think that for all our viewers, I think I should go ahead and make this clear. If you're not normal, this is not a book for you. This is a book for normal people.
Right.
Normal people that want to, know ancient Greek.
I'd say even the abnormal and oh yeah, just replete with very subtle, dry humor in entries all throughout the book, but which is, I don't know, surprising and kind of a
I don't know
nice
what you're talking about. I would never put a joke in a book. Now, listen, what I would do is something serious, like organizing all the vocabulary etymology. Now, you should ask me about that, shouldn't you?
I should. Please answer.
So I don't know if this is the first lexicon or dictionary that I'm aware of that organizes the vocabulary etymologically, but in a way that you can visually follow the sequence of how words were formed from each other. And so you've got the first word based on a certain root, there, and then anything that's derived from it is inset from it visually, so that you can visually follow the derivation of words. And that is really helpful in, I guess, learning the morphological patterns, the word formation patterns of ancient Greek. And you sort of subconsciously get familiar with those patterns to the point where you internalize them, and then when you see a new word, you'll realize where that one is from. You can pretty much know how it came about. And so, as far as I know, this is the first lexicon that lists words in that way, where the if I want, I guess the sequence of derivation, the etymological sequence is obvious visually.
I find that so helpful. One that I was especially struck by, I guess a week ago when I first got the book, was seeing that σχεδόν, which is quasi, I can't think of the English word,
Yeah,
almost, nearly,
nearly, almost.
yeah, is related to ekhin, that,
Yeah, because echin means to have, but it also means to hold close to, or actually in the middle or passive, echistai tini means to like hold yourself. I mean, to hold, to be held near something. And from that came schedon, which was like nearly, almost. Yeah.
mm,
So personally, I learn vocabulary and remember vocabulary a lot better if I see those relationships and if I see them obviously.
Man, I just feel like you made this book for someone like me who's been craving that exact thing. Because I've had a few colleagues who've led classes in ancient Greek, and they do that kind of thing. They show, oh, how this word is related to this one. It's like, oh, wow, this is really powerful. And to see it laid out like that visually,
Yeah,
really
here
just
I tried to lay it out and make it obvious to everybody.
I,
So
I feel like I don't know if you're a Simpsons fan, but I remember this episode where the I think Bart or the children were able to hide all the teachers' answer books because they realized the teachers didn't know anything, and then finally they found them. They were hidden somewhere, and then Principal Skinner, when he gets them back, he's just like answers, answers. So that's what I feel like. What I have is like answers finally to all my questions for years that I never knew uh, how to respond to. I want to ask you how many languages you've studied.
I mean, probably for spoken fluency, I'm at 7 or 8. So I had English, did Schuldeutsch, I had it in Colorado in the 1980s. I did German at junior high school and high school, and there weren't many of us. And I'm pretty convinced that the kids who did French or Spanish had more fun. But I was born with this surname and certain heritage, so that I was sort of assumed that I had to learn German. Um, I'm pretty good in Danish as
Okay.
well. So those are my three Germanic languages, and then I have spent time studying in Italy, Switzerland, and then I did spend 4 years in Spain. So I've got those three Romance languages. I live here in the Czech Republic, and actually the reason I came here was to learn the language. I didn't intend on staying, but I have. So I'm fluent in Czech, and then now I guess, am I fluent in ancient Greek? I'm pretty, I feel pretty confident. I can
Mm,
basically say what I need to.
mm.
It's not error free, but it's decent. I think I'm pretty confident.
Yeah. Well, error-free is an unattainable goal, for sure, even for native speakers.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah,
really that was the thing, is that ancient Greek is the most recent one. And I mean, after I learned Czech, Czech is so hard that when I kind of thought I was fluent in Czech, I kind of swore I was never going to do another language because it was just, I think I would have to say that for me, becoming fluent in Czech was as much of a challenge as becoming fluent in the other six put together. It is that just that difficult for somebody who starts from English.
you like all the cases?
Oh my God, I couldn't believe that. Listen, when I did 4 years of Latin at university, but never spoke it, and it was the old methods where it was, grammar and translation, which doesn't work for me. I mean, I do know people who are able to learn Latin or ancient Greek without ever speaking it, and they just, for them, I guess it's like mathematics or something, and they get to the point where they can read anything fluently. I don't think that that's typical in the population. I certainly don't have the brain for that. And so for me, to become comfortable in a language, even comfortable reading it, I have to use it. I have to have some active knowledge of it. And so that's the way I learned my modern languages. And then I came to ancient Greek, and I spent maybe 2 or 3 years trying to do it the grammar and translation method, and I just wasn't making any progress. And then I made the switch to, I realized that there were people who were trying to do it in the normal way you learn a language, which is treating it as a means of communication.
Yeah.
And so, but the problem was that there really weren't very good tools for doing that. And, you know, in the interview in ancient Greek that I did, I think I showed this, but I mean, I think this is just a classic example. This helps me a lot with my German. This is a thematic lexicon of modern, normal, spoken and written German. And so it organizes vocabulary into, you know, categories like Gorky is annoyed that I'm talking German, you know,
Pets.
talking about German. So
Yeah.
family and relatives is here, human beings in society, professional life, work machines and office equipment. Now, so this is a really good tool to have. And these exist for almost all modern languages, or at least the more widely spoken ones. And of course, here, this has been put together by, I don't know, 5 or 6 native speakers of German who know which words are the most common. So
Right.
here you're going to get the words that are used pretty much every day, whether in spoken German or in the newspaper or on the TV. You're not going to find words from the Nibelungenlied in here. And you're not going to find extremely technical medical words or whatever, you know, and for that, there are other dictionaries or whatever. But, you know, it's an extremely powerful tool. And I wanted something like this for ancient Greek. And there quite simply was no such thing in existence. And so, you know, we have some lexica of, you know, some thematic lexica of ancient Greek, but they mix dialects. They don't tell you how frequent the words are. In other words, they don't give you the kind of information that comes automatically when native speakers put together a book like this for a modern language. And so I decided, I know I was silly enough to think, okay, this is something that I should do, is put together the equivalent in ancient Greek of this, which means, but you know, I'm not a native speaker of ancient Greek, so in order to compensate, you have the corpus tools, and so that's what the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae was for, is that, you know, if you're willing to put enough effort into it, you can determine how common a word was, what kind of texts use it. And so that information is in the Pharos, which makes it more or less equivalent to something that could have been put together by a native speaker.
Yeah.
Right.
There's nothing like this to this extent that I can think of for Latin. But yeah,
Don't
I
look
mean,
at me. I'm not doing that one.
no.
No, no, no,
Hold up.
no, 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 no.
We'll talk.
No, 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 no.
But yeah, I mean, because Latin is kind of a solved problem in a way. People have been able to, thousands of people speak Latin around the world with a great deal of fluency and comfort.
Using the corpus tools, I determined what was kind of standard Greek, standard Koine.
Yeah.
And I think that that was in reference to some parts of the New Testament and the Septuagint, which are definitely not standard Koine. And I think that they are intentionally not standard Koine. And so I think that what you want to do when you're learning any foreign language, whether it's a modern one or an ancient one, you want to get a feel for what the standard was, because then when a writer goes beyond that and writes something different, you recognize that it's different, that it's exotic, that it's right. And I think a lot of the stuff in the Septuagint, for example, it's quite deliberately not standard Koine, because it was never meant to be. It was meant to sound exotic and reflect the Hebrew original. And so there was never any intention of in much of that for it to be standard Koine. But we lose that if we're not aware of what the more normal language was. And so again, this book is an attempt to not codify, but compile the standard normal Koine. And if you're familiar with that, then you'll immediately start recognizing the more exotic phrasing that shows up in a lot of Jewish or Christian writing.
And that is important. That's something I've often kind of marveled at too, especially how when you think of like the epic in the Greek is a different dialect, and it's very
Exactly.
inaccessible unless you do, I don't know, you try to memorize it or something, and that which I've been trying to do, and that's been helpful. But otherwise, it's so odd. Whereas Virgil in the Aeneid, there are some exotic poetic things, but there are so many colloquial expressions that you find elsewhere that are very normal, actually conversational phrases. They're just in meter. And then, but yeah, that's another really important problem approaching as all as foreigners, all of us, when we come to this ancient language. None of us are native speakers, feeling what's exotic, what's poetic, what's musical, and what's completely plain. And we have otherwise no way of feeling through that. So and yeah, you're right. Someday you found it here. It's hopefully later when our feel for standard usage is strong enough, we'll be able to appreciate any deviations from that usage as part of the special flavor of a text. Something which we have in Latin, but I agree that we don't really have that as a collective community of speakers of ancient Greek yet. I'm sure there are some people out there, but it's not as much as say in Latin,
Yeah.
comparatively. So yeah, it's amazing. And I wanted to give a shout out to our mutual friend Jenny, where I first saw the book. I definitely recommend everybody subscribe to her channel, which is Argos Didaski. But it's really she teaching. I've learned so much watching her videos.
She was my main proofreader and my editor on this project, and she's been absolutely fantastic, and um, not just fantastic, but also brave and perseverant and patient. So this wouldn't exist without her. So yeah, shout out to her for helping out with that. Manthanin eta homerica, eta attica, eta poetica, eta koina, ala kata medena tropon manthanin panta homo kaianamix.
Homologo.
That was also very convincing for me to hear you both, because of course I know that Jenny's quite comfortable speaking ancient Greek, and then to hear you, I had no idea who you were, and hear you speaking so fluently, and also using a Koine-Era pronunciation that sounds a lot like what I call the Pompeian variant of Lucian pronunciation. I was like, wow, that's really cool. That's really like he's embracing this Koine thing, and
I'll take that as a compliment. If you
oh yeah,
if you recognized some particular variant of your pronunciation in there, I'll take that as a compliment. And that's something that's not bound to this lexicon, but yeah, the pronunciation, that's always a big people fuss over that kind of endlessly. And
I have fussed endlessly over that. Yeah, I am the some people in your sentence.
right. And listen, I have an interesting, I don't know if this is interesting, but I did a course in full immersion in ancient Greek 5 years ago, and our teacher at that time was Michal Kefalos.
Oh yeah, Kefalos. Yeah.
Yeah, and at that time, everybody more or less was speaking in with an more or less a variant of Erasmian pronunciation, and then I arrived with the more of a
Like a Boothian pronunciation?
yeah, more of a Boothian kind of a pronunciation, because I had never heard anybody speak,
Yeah.
and people couldn't understand me, and they asked him about it, and he said, "Well, you know what? When you get good, you just that whole issue just will recede from prominence, and because basically the variations are going to be small enough that they won't bother you, and you'll understand these various ways of people, no matter which way they pronounce it." And I didn't really believe him at the time, but 5 years later, yeah, he's right. People make probably you want to find sort of a consistent way of speaking if you're going to want to speak ancient Greek. And this is, I think, more of a problem than it is for Latin, where I think there's almost universal agreement on the classical pronunciation, more or less.
Yeah, and ecclesiastical pronunciation speakers are rather frequent, and they're well. I'll let you finish, and then I have some responses to that. But go ahead.
Yeah, but in Greek, there's no real. So there, people who learn in ancient Greek in universities in Europe and seminaries and probably universities in North America kind of have kind of regional variations of an Erasmian pronunciation. And there's some who, I mean, those who speak modern Greek, they hate that, and they really get upset about that. And I think over the past 10, 15 years, some kind of very healthy work has been done with the pronunciation of ancient Greek. And there are people like yourself now who are um, aware that of how, more or less, how it was spoken at various times. And so I think we will get to a point where a lot of people are going to be using the kind of pronunciation that you espouse or advocate for in some of your so-called Lucian pronunciation. So at this point, I'm
Yeah.
probably close to that, and I will keep trying to improve
Yeah.
and ignore the people. There's some people in the peanut gallery who don't, no matter how you pronounce it,
You
they
can't
won't
please
like.
everybody,
That's right.
but it's
Yeah,
fine. They can enjoy their not speaking fluent ancient Greek, because that's what really
very
the
true.
point. I do talk a lot about that, so that's sort of my long-term pet project, is investigating that, both a combination of trying to understand historical realities of pronunciation for Latin and ancient Greek in different periods or regions, insofar as that's possible, because that's fun. And then, like you said, trying to turn that into some kind of workable conventions. I also espouse classical Attic pronunciation too, which I don't talk about as much because, well, I'm just there's well, I mean, classical Attic is 2 centuries, not even, and Koine is this enormous period, so there's a lot of variation going on. So that's why I've been spending so much time on it. And like exactly what you said, and I've experienced this too. Once you get good, or at least good enough at the language, those things start to fall away. It can take a little bit to adapt, but it's almost like, I think a good comparison would be Europeans who travel within Europe. They're almost always going to be speaking English to one another. What a bizarre thing that I've seen, where Spaniards and Italians speak English at each other. Whereas a few decades ago, where the English studies weren't as strong, they would speak Spanish or Italian at each other and they would figure it out. But now that blows my mind how they do that. How that's and they all have their own regional accents,
Listen,
of course.
I've seen people from different cantons in Switzerland who all speak some one or another dialect of German. I mean, they speak English together. So I've seen people from St. Moritz and people from Basel. I've seen them find it easier just to speak English together than to speak their disparate, dialects
Of
of
Swiss German.
German.
Wow,
Yes.
that's
And
amazing.
that, to me, that's makes me laugh a little bit, because I guess that's what Koine Greek was. I mean, in the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond, as far as Afghanistan and India, I mean,
Yeah, Bactria.
that's what you spoke. I mean, if you wanted to communicate with somebody that wasn't of your tribe, well, you did it in Koine Greek.
Yeah.
So merchants all over the Eastern Mediterranean, so the Koine Greek was the ancient equivalent to sort of our English right now, as spread by the internet, but ancient Greek was a lot harder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hats off to those people.
Oh, well, maybe I don't know. I think the perception of a language's difficulty has a lot to do with learning materials and good reference materials, because if in lieu of good teaching materials, because the ancient Greek teaching materials are few. I have to get back to my own projects to help in that regard with some videos and things like that, because I think that's what you and I maybe have that in common, just trying to learn this language, being confronted with the obstacles, and then trying to create something to deal with one
Yeah.
or other of those obstacles. I wanted to comment too on the Latin, spoken Latin today. I remember going to Living Latin New York, maybe it was a couple years ago, and there were a couple folks who went there who are more familiar with, they learn Latin pretty quickly, listening to audiobooks and things that I had made and recordings or my videos. And so they were only used to classical pronunciation. Then there were people there using ecclesiastical pronunciation. They're like, oh, Luke, I can't understand this guy. And I said, I remember being in the same position. And I told them that one of the best ways to get used to it, there's the Gorky.
Go to geese.
Yeah, always cute. Um, is to one of the most useful things to do is to actually practice reciting in that pronunciation. Maybe not try to speak in it spontaneously, but just take a text,
Yeah.
whatever you want.
And I think that, people who do Latin have the advantage that you can go on YouTube now and you can find passages read in a very pure classical pronunciation, but you can also find passages read in an ecclesiastical pronunciation. And so you can hear it
Mm.
and get used to it that way. Just as Gorky doesn't like the German book again. Just as if I want to work my German, I can now, I mean, something we couldn't do 30 years ago, but now if I want to be able to understand Austrians speaking, I can find Austrian speaking, and yeah, at the beginning it'll be a little tougher than understanding proper Preußisch. But within a few weeks, if I keep at it, I can understand it, and I think that we will over time see more materials in ancient Greek. In maybe some reconstructed Attic. There is some already out there, and I'm sure you would recommend the videos or the audiobooks done by Ioannis Stratakis,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
who, although he is a native speaker of Greece, he doesn't
Well,
read ancient Greek with the modern Greek pronunciation, but with a
yeah.
very nice
Well,
reconstructed pronunciation.
something I've yet to see is someone, a truly fluent, because there's so few of them anyway, truly fluent speaker of ancient Greek who uses a full modern Greek pronunciation. I'm sure they exist, but to be like uh, uh but and then how that works, because my feeling is that one of my interests in some kind of reconstructive pronunciation is that certain accommodations are often made in the usages in order to make things clearer. And one of them I can think of, there's a classical Latin which is an emphatic like hasce, which is like hastinas or something like that equivalent. So it's more or less like that. It's just an emphatic has. So it's these, and the little k is added after it. And it's used a lot more, I think, by ecclesiastical speakers because since if you have has, if it's just as, without that little h aspiration sound, it makes it slightly more difficult for speakers who don't pronounce an h sound to interpret that particular word. And then they would, of course, make it ashe instead, which that stands out. You hear that very clearly. And little things like that. And there's nothing wrong with you. That's a perfectly legitimate classical Latin word. It's a Latin word because there really isn't much difference between the Latin, which is this multi-millennial thing, and classical Latin. They're virtually the same thing. But certain preferences are made, certain things are avoided, certain things aren't clear because of maybe a vowel length thing, or all these different things that the ancient people might have used. And insofar as it helps us appreciate the literature or understand how the literature is written, and then thus we might hopefully produce either in speech or in writing something that is similar to some ancient author or group of authors or century of authors, is somewhat influenced by that pronunciation. And then when it comes to communication, like, for example, just thinking of die, every reconstructed ancient pronunciation through Boothian, die, that's, which is a very, Attic kind of like, die, it's like, so just die. And with it, just how iota, eta for those listening at home. And but what is that? How is that sound at all different from, the? Just slightly longer, and then would that in a modern Greek pronunciation, and is that enough, does one then end up avoiding parts of ancient Greek speech
Yeah, I
that are
mean,
not?
of
Yeah,
all the choices, I think that the pronouncing ancient Greek and modern Greek pronunciation poses the most challenges to the
yeah.
listener because
I'm
of
not
the
opposed to it at all, and I want to be able to do that too someday.
yeah.
I want to be able to speak in a number of different pronunciations because something I like to do in Latin, and it's way easier in Latin,
because
is if I meet.
you've got the capacity for that. Some don't, and and
Yeah.
I think that there's various choices, and as long as you stick to one consistently,
Mm,
and use some
yeah.
self-reflection, I think it's going to be okay. And experienced listeners will be able to understand you. And
Yeah.
I really do look forward to the time when we have a lot more to listen to, because I think listening to a language is so helpful
Mm,
for getting comfortable and familiar with it. And so that's
yeah.
all available in Latin already, but not yet in ancient Greek. And I think we'll get there.
Absolutely. And also when it comes to Greek, if one is listening to a pronunciation that isn't what they normally prefer, because I remember having this experience with Latin, like, oh, and even those people I was talking to, they're like, oh, I don't want to listen to the ecclesiastical it all because it's different or I don't understand it. And my advice was do a kind of modified shadowing technique. Someone actually taught me to do this with Greek, or in Latin too. You hear, I don't know, say you're hearing something in ecclesiastical pronunciation for Latin, but you want to use classical. You're not don't want to, learn ecclesiastical per se or speak that way, but this is a good speaker and you
Yeah.
want to acquire their vocabulary and their idiom because it's good.
Yeah.
Well, every time they say a sentence, pause the recording and then say it back in the pronunciation you prefer, and do the same thing with Greek.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether if you prefer Erasmian or if you prefer classical, Boothian, modern, something in between.
Right, and I use that when I'm teaching modern languages, as I insist, and I often say this. I mean, for me, it's the case that language is a very physical thing. It's something I do with my body, and it's not something I do only with my brain. And I force my students to just repeat things. I mean, I say, well, if you hear a nice phrase, repeat it, say it, use your jaw muscles to repeat it, get it into your muscle memory, not just into your brain. Right. And I
I
think
strongly
that,
agree.
yeah. And for me, even in ancient languages, it's something that needs to be physical. It needs to be something that I hear, that I speak, that I feel, rather than just something that I read on the page.
Oh, I agree.
There's some people that are probably much more talented than me and can make an entire world just of what they see on the page, but that's not me. So
Hmm. No, I very much agree. I'm the same way with Latin and Greek. And thinking of Kephalos, who gave the advice when I asked him how to learn this Homer stuff, and he was saying how he had memorized some parts of it or got really used to comfortably reciting it. And he
yeah,
said that when you do that, you'll find that even if you don't remember the word for a second, your mouth physically goes into the correct
yeah,
vowel position,
yeah,
and
it's
then you
muscle
remember
memory.
it.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
found the same experience trying to memorize it too. So
And I always
that's
say
really
that
good
speaking a
advice.
language fluent, I tell my students here in Brno that speaking a language fluently is like dancing,
Hmm.
right? You're going to give a good dance performance when you've rehearsed it enough that it's in your muscle memory and your brain doesn't really have to do as much work. And so you get fluent in a language when much of it, large chunks of it are in your muscle memory, and then your brain is doing far less work and can concentrate on nuances and that kind of thing. But I always make that analogy: dancing and speaking a language, and nobody would dare get out on stage and try to give a dance performance without having physically practiced the movements many, many times and gotten them into muscle memory. And to me, that's what languages are like.
I agree. Yeah. Well, in the composing of this book, what was your favorite or unexpected
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah. Good question. Listen, most of the work was, you know, compiling, organizing the information, and not finding a lot of new information. And the world needs compilers as well as um, you know,
Chroniclers.
as well as artists. But then there was one really, really shocking thing that I found. To me, at least, it was very astonishing, and that was when I was putting together the chapter on time. And we have to, those of us who communicate together in ancient Greek, we have to make appointments. And we were struggling because we weren't really sure how to tell the time. And so it kind of fell to me to organize all those set phrases that have to do with telling the time. And I was really struggling with understanding exactly what those set phrases meant, because some of them kind of, I sort of got an intuitive feeling that some of them couldn't be, this phrase couldn't be used by the same person as is using this phrase. They just didn't fit together. And so I eventually discovered, through hard work and also a bit of luck, that the ancient Greeks told the time in a completely different way than the Romans did. And we today essentially tell the time like the Romans did. And so we have completely lost the ability to understand what ancient Greeks mean when they tell the time. And so that was a real surprise to discover that basically, if and when a phrase about a numbered hour in an ancient Greek text has been translated, it has been translated wrong. I mean, all of them. And that includes Jewish and Christian literature. It includes pagan literature. And so that was really the surprising thing. And we talked about doing another video about that. So we'll try to make sure to put that together. But that was really sort of a thrill for me to make that discovery, that people who spoke Greek, and this up to the fall of Constantinople, they told the time differently than we do and than the Romans did. And that, as far as I know, has been completely lost for centuries now. And so we'll talk about that later. But
I can't wait. I'm
really
thrilled too,
nice to
knowing about that.
to make some like a discovery like that, and so that I was doing in the end more than just compiling and organizing other people's information. So that was a shock, and we'll talk about that more.
Oh, I can't wait. And yeah, I know a little bit. And if you out there want to know how to tell the time accurately, correctly, in the ancient Greek way, it's in this book. I think that's worth the whole book on its own. And then you also get the entire ancient Greek prose language. How do you feel about neologisms?
Yeah, not a big fan of those. Not a big fan of those. I don't speak modern Greek myself. I have no real problem, with it. I don't spend enough time in Greece for it really to be, one of my ambitions to become fluent in modern Greek. And I know that a lot of people, and again, this is not a vast community in the world, people who are using ancient Greek actively, but one of the ways you get better at a language is you speak about everyday things that you do. And of course, we do things that, we have objects, and we do things that ancient Greeks did not. And so, when we're speaking together, we often get to the point, hey, how do we say that? And so some people will just take the word from modern Greek and use it. And I have not put any of those words into this lexicon. This lexicon is only words that are attested in Koine Greek. And wherever possible, personally, I try to find something in ancient Greek that's at least similar, because I think that by using that word, it puts me sort of in the middle of a web of other words in ancient Greek that I probably, should at least recognize or whatever. Whereas if I kind of feel like if I use a word from modern Greek, that doesn't really help me learn related words, from the same semantic category in ancient Greek. So again, the example that I gave you when we talked before was for a computer. I guess the modern Greek word is hypologister, right?
Okay, moi.
Right. And so I didn't know that, but already years ago, we talk on Zoom on the computer. We needed a word for computer, so I don't know, I found the word abax, which is an abacus, which is a computing machine. That was their closest thing to a computer. So I've just ever since then I've used abax for a computer. And so there are a few things like that in this book where it's an ancient word and it can be used for a modern object or a modern concept. But I've tried to I have completely excluded invented words and neologisms from the lexicon.
Well, I mean, that's fair because I think the point of it is how do we, hey there, Gorky. I think the point of it is very clear that how do we actually, what are the frequency of this word and the Koine and the
Yeah.
Attic Koine
Right, because
language?
in the end, I think that
That's
is
what
our
it's about.
goal.
Yeah,
We are trying to. Some of us are trying to use this language actively, but of course, the point of that is to get better at using it passively.
right.
And so, to me, learning, neologisms, it doesn't really
And
move us towards that goal. So,
right, and neologisms vary. There's a wonderful the Neo-Latin Lexicon .org, the Lexicon Morganianum, that Patrick Owens has been running now for some years, and that's fantastic to see how many neologisms have been made through the continuous use of Latin as a sort of somewhat standardized modern form in modern Latin from, of course, the Middle Ages and then the Renaissance all the way up to the 20th century and beyond. And it's all in there. So you can actually, if you're looking for the word for lemon or something, you can look
yeah,
it up and see there's different words that are used. But neologisms, especially if they're new technological things, the terms vary all the time. What a telephone is today is very different from what a telephone was just 30 years ago.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, and where cell phones were abnormal, and now most people don't even have landlines anymore. And that was
Right.
and plus there's a whole bunch of other things. So the neologisms are variable and can be changed. And someone with a strong command of the foundation,
Yeah,
such as yourself, can either like in Latin we use raida for car most of the time, not
yeah,
autoginetum, which is
yeah,
fine. There's
yeah.
nothing wrong with that, and we all understand it. But it's like coche and carro. Like, I mean, it's fine. You can have that variety in
Yeah,
there.
so
Really,
I think somebody
there's
that
voice.
for that reason, again, there's no neologisms in here. Somebody who doesn't really have any intention of using ancient Greek communicatively can also find, use in this lexicon. It's the vocabulary of, you know, ancient Greek as it was.
Well, that's why it's so exciting to me. Neologisms are easy enough to coin on the spot or just use a circumlocution, but getting a command of the real core language is the only way to begin.
Yeah,
You don't want to start. It's like learning a language by starting with the swear words. It's like, why? Which a lot of people do. I
yeah,
mean,
get it out.
I don't fault anybody who gets curious about a language for that reason, because any language learning is good
Yeah,
in my opinion. But still, it's like it's not the way to really acquire the language. To that
right.
end, maybe a good final question, or for you would be, what advice can you give people who want to communicate in ancient Greek or learn the language?
In general, I would say um, be aware that there was spoken Greek, which was a lot less complicated than what you'll find in Xenophon or Plato, or if you want to talk about high register Koine, less complicated than Philo of Alexandria. Wow, that is hard. That is hard. And so, um, my advice is to, again, do what you would do in a modern language. I mean, if you wanted to learn German, you wouldn't start by reading Goethe. You would start with fun stuff. That's easier, and that's something that I think we all can do in ancient Greek. I don't know about Latin. I'm less aware of that, but in ancient Greek, particularly in Koine, there's good, fun stuff that's not terribly philosophical, and may not be the best literature, but it's good fun, and that's what you need to do before you try to scale the highest peaks. So that's something that I think we will all get a little bit better at, and I think we will see the appearance, we'll see the publication of more of those kind of texts that are that way. And that, if you're more familiar with those texts, then you realize that this is actual language that people spoke, and they in a at times in a reasonably clear and simple way. And so that, I think, is important at the beginning. And that's, for me, one of the advantages of starting through Koine rather than Attic, is because there are writings in Koine that are clear, simple, fun. I'm not so sure that that's really the case with Attic. So that's one thing I would say. Yeah, take it actively. And this is the same thing I said when Jenny interviewed me. Don't just read it. Listen to it and speak it, and make it a language rather than some abstract exercise on paper.
Well, thank you for that advice. Thank you so much, Adrian, for making Pharos for us, because I am so excited with what I'm going to be able to learn from it, and for what will be the future for our community of ancient Greek speakers.
Good. Hey, I'm glad you like it. I'm thrilled to death that you find it so useful, and hey, enjoy it.
Thank you. Karin Soida.